Lauren and Daniel Myers had just said "I do," but by the end of their luxury honeymoon cruise, only one of them would make it back home, and the truth behind that disappearance would expose a web of betrayal, greed, and a deadly conspiracy hiding in plain sight. Lauren Myers had always been someone who believed in fairy tales. Growing up in a small Vermont town, she was the kind of person who still sent handwritten thank you notes and kept fresh flowers on her kitchen table. When she met Daniel Myers at a wedding 2 summers ago, it felt like one of those rare moments where real life lined up perfectly with every romantic movie she'd ever seen. Daniel was tall, polished, and funny in that understated way that made people lean in to listen. He worked in finance, traveled for work, and owned a sleek apartment in Boston. To Lauren, his world seemed exciting, full of the promise of something bigger than her quiet life back home. Their relationship moved quickly, but no one around her seemed worried. To friends, it looked like a love story unfolding naturally. He was attentive, bought her thoughtful gifts, remembered the names of her students. They laughed at the same jokes and talked late into the night about future plans. Maybe buying a house near the coast, maybe even starting a family in a couple of years. By the time Daniel proposed during a weekend getaway to Lake Placid, it felt inevitable. Lauren said yes without hesitation, caught up in the glow of the moment and the future they had planned together. For their honeymoon, Daniel booked a luxury cruise through the Caribbean. 7 days on a floating resort, visiting pristine beaches, enjoying candlelit dinners on deck, and exploring colorful island towns. Lauren had never been on a cruise before, but she was excited for the adventure. She filled her suitcase with sundresses and swimsuits, bought a new camera to capture every memory, and couldn't stop smiling as they boarded the ship in Miami. Pictures from that day showed Lauren glowing with happiness, leaning into Daniel's side, sunglasses perched on her head, ready to start their new life together. The first few days of the trip went exactly as planned. They lounged by the pool during the day, tried exotic foods at night, and even took a snorkeling tour together off the coast of the Bahamas. Everything seemed picture perfect, at least from the outside. But behind the scenes, small cracks had started to form. Lauren confided in a woman she met on the ship that Daniel had been distant lately, often distracted or irritable, something she brushed off as stress from the wedding planning. She told herself they were just adjusting to married life, nothing to worry about. Honeymoons were supposed to be magical, but real life didn't always match up with expectation. By the 4th night, things felt a little strained. Daniel skipped dinner that evening, claiming he wasn't feeling well, leaving Lauren to eat alone in the ship's formal dining room. Later, she was seen wandering the upper deck, staring out at the black waves rolling endlessly into the horizon. No one could have predicted that those images of Lauren, caught briefly on security cameras with her hair blowing in the ocean breeze, would be the last anyone would see of her. What started as a love story was about to turn into something much darker. As soon as the announcement echoed across the ship that a passenger was missing, an uneasy silence swept through the luxury cruise liner. Passengers gathered in hallways, whispering anxiously, stealing glances at each other. The party-like atmosphere of the honeymoon cruise had shifted into something colder, something heavy with dread. The missing passenger was Lauren Myers. A young bride, newly married, vanished in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest trip of her life. The ship's captain ordered an immediate lockdown of all exits and instructed the crew to begin a thorough search of every deck, hallway, and common area. Cabin doors were knocked on one by one as stewards checked bathrooms, balconies, closets, anywhere someone could have gone unnoticed. Overhead, helicopters were dispatched from the nearest Coast Guard station, scanning the waves with powerful lights, looking for any sign of movement in the water. Yet the ocean was vast, stretching endlessly in every direction, swallowing everything that touched its surface. The footage from the ship's security cameras became the focus of the investigation. Hundreds of cameras recorded every movement on board, offering a web of coverage. As technicians reviewed hours of footage, they located the last known sighting of Lauren. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. She was standing alone at the edge of the top deck, leaning slightly over the railing, the wind catching her dress. The sea behind her was dark, endless, and silent. The footage didn't show anyone approaching her, no struggle, no fall. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. Daniel Myers became the center of attention. He appeared shocked when questioned, claiming that Lauren had gone outside to get some air after a small disagreement about their dinner plans. According to him, he thought she just needed a little time to herself and decided to give her space. He admitted to going to bed without checking on her again. His version of events painted him as an innocent, grieving husband caught in the middle of a nightmare he never saw coming. But to the investigators, it didn't sit right. Why would a new husband allow his wife to wander the upper decks of a moving ship late at night, alone, after an argument? Why didn't he go looking for her when she didn't come back? Questions piled up, and with them suspicions. Lauren's friends and family back home watched the developing news with disbelief, struggling to make sense of it all. Photos of Lauren smiling in her wedding dress were splashed across headlines, alongside words like tragedy and mystery. As the hours turned into days, no physical trace of Lauren was found. No clothing, no jewelry, no belongings floating in the water. The sea gave nothing back. While to outsiders it was shaping into a heartbreaking accident, those closer to the investigation knew better. Something about this disappearance didn't feel accidental. There were too many missing pieces, and the more they searched, the clearer it became that Lauren's vanishing wasn't just bad luck. It was part of a much darker story waiting to be uncovered. Back on land, as news of Lauren's disappearance spread, investigators began digging into Daniel Myers' background, searching for anything that might explain what had happened on that ship. What they found wasn't what Lauren's friends or family expected. To them, Daniel had seemed like a steady, responsible man, someone who loved Lauren and had treated her well. But beneath that polished surface was a different version of Daniel, a version hidden from the smiling photographs and polite conversations at family gatherings. Months before the wedding, Daniel's financial world had begun to unravel. It started with small bets at casinos, but quickly escalated into serious debt. Trips to Atlantic City became secret weekends where he'd lose thousands in a single night. Friends from his past described him differently than how he presented himself to Lauren's family. They remembered a man who chased risky deals, gambled recklessly, and always seemed to believe that the next win would solve everything. That win never came. What did come were threatening phone calls from debt collectors, mounting credit card balances, and desperate late-night online gambling losses. Then came the discovery that sent shockwaves through the case. A life insurance policy taken out on Lauren just weeks before their honeymoon. The policy, worth over $2 million, had Daniel listed as the sole beneficiary. Investigators raised their eyebrows at the timing. Why would a couple just starting out, with no children and no mortgage, need such a massive payout in case of death? It didn't fit with the narrative of a happy, hopeful future. It fit with something else entirely, a plan. Further examination of Daniel's phone revealed encrypted messaging apps, conversations carefully hidden from casual discovery. One particular thread stood out. The messages were brief, vague on purpose, but filled with hints of something more sinister. Phrases like, "done soon," and "stick to the plan" appeared, along with references to payments and arrangements. The person on the other end of the conversation was only identified by a single initial. Whoever this person was, they clearly knew more than they should about Lauren's disappearance. The pieces were starting to form a picture. Daniel had gambling debts that he couldn't repay, a brand new life insurance policy on his wife, and secret messages with an unidentified accomplice. To detectives, it was beginning to look less like a tragic accident at sea and more like a carefully orchestrated plot. The problem was, they still didn't have hard evidence that Daniel had pushed or harmed Lauren. There was no weapon, no witness, and no confession. But what investigators did know was that Daniel's story was falling apart. His once calm appearance now showed cracks. His eyes avoided cameras. His voice trembled during interviews. The mask of the grieving husband was slipping. Yet even as suspicion mounted, no one could have predicted that the story was about to get even stranger. Because while all eyes were focused on Daniel, the real mystery was still hiding in plain sight. waiting to change everything they thought they knew about what really happened on that cruise. As investigators continued to build their case against Daniel, another layer of the mystery quietly surfaced, one that no one had seen coming. While Daniel's life insurance policy and encrypted messages pointed to a calculated crime, there were disturbing patterns connected to the cruise ship itself. This wasn't the first time someone had gone missing on this particular cruise line. Over the past 5 years, there had been at least 3 other disappearances reported during voyages on the same fleet, each incident brushed off as accidental falls or suicides. The official investigations had been closed, leaving behind grieving families and unanswered questions. What stood out to investigators now was that in each of those cases, the same senior security officer had been on duty: Nathan Cole. His personnel file painted a picture of a reliable, long-serving employee, but the coincidences were starting to feel deliberate. It became clear that Nathan had access to security cameras, footage archives, and restricted areas of the ship where passengers were rarely seen. The more the authorities looked into it, the more they realized that key footage during these past disappearances had mysteriously been lost or deleted. And in Lauren's case, it was the same story. Several cameras near the top deck where she was last seen had no footage available from that night, conveniently labeled as technical errors. A confidential tip sent to the FBI made everything worse. The anonymous message claimed that some members of the crew's security team were involved in an underground criminal network that targeted vulnerable passengers, people traveling alone, couples who appeared to be arguing, or guests who seemed isolated were often chosen. The operation wasn't just about theft or petty crime. It was suspected to involve trafficking, staged accidents, and disappearances orchestrated for profit. The cruise line, eager to protect its reputation and avoid lawsuits, had quietly settled with families of missing passengers in the past, never fully disclosing what they knew. Suddenly, Daniel's actions seemed to be part of a much larger, more dangerous conspiracy. Investigators now had 2 possible narratives to untangle: one where Daniel had planned his wife's murder for financial gain, and another where corrupt members of the ship's own crew might have taken advantage of the situation for their own purposes. Or worse, what if the 2 were connected? What if Daniel hadn't acted alone, but had hired help from the very people responsible for the ship's security? Meanwhile, passengers who had been on the cruise with Lauren were questioned again. Several recalled seeing crew members acting strangely that night, guiding certain guests away from specific areas or blocking stairways temporarily. A few even mentioned seeing Lauren near the railing, but with someone standing just out of sight in the shadows. These vague recollections only deepened the confusion. The cruise ship that promised adventure and romance was now under suspicion of being a floating trap for the vulnerable, operated by people trusted to protect its guests. And with Lauren still missing, the line between victim and survivor remained dangerously thin, leaving investigators wondering how far the conspiracy really reached, and whether Lauren's story was truly over yet. 4 months after Lauren's disappearance, when the media frenzy had started to fade, and many assumed her body would never be found, a startling development emerged from a small fishing village along the northern coast of the Dominican Republic. A local shop owner had reported seeing a woman who didn't seem to belong, a foreigner, living alone, quiet, cautious, and always avoiding strangers. Photos of the missing bride had circulated widely during the early investigation, and the shopkeeper, recognizing her face, contacted local authorities. When police arrived at the tiny, weather-beaten house where she had been staying, they found a woman living under a false name, with forged identification papers and a story that didn't add up. But fingerprints don't lie. When her prints were sent back to the United States and run through federal databases, the truth became undeniable. The woman was Lauren Myers. She wasn't dead. She hadn't fallen into the ocean. She had run. The details that followed were even more astonishing than anyone could have predicted. In the days before the cruise, Lauren had discovered Daniel's double life. She found secret bank accounts, overdue gambling debts, and, most chilling of all, documents related to the life insurance policy taken out in her name. It didn't take long for her to piece together that Daniel's financial problems and her sudden, unexpected value in death were connected. Fearful and unsure of who she could trust, Lauren didn't confront Daniel directly. Instead, she quietly planned her escape. Lauren's lifeline came in the form of Nathan Cole, the very security officer now under suspicion for other disappearances. Nathan wasn't acting alone, and while his motives were criminal, he also saw Lauren's situation as leverage. With the help of this corrupt network on the cruise, Lauren arranged to vanish at the ship's stop in St. Thomas. Smugglers operating in coordination with the crew helped her off the ship undetected. She was whisked away, provided with fake documents, and smuggled across Caribbean islands until she ended up in that small Dominican village, living in fear but alive. Meanwhile, Daniel, believing the plan had gone perfectly, played the role of heartbroken husband, prepared to collect the life insurance money. What he hadn't counted on was Lauren surviving and turning his scheme inside out. When news broke that Lauren was alive, Daniel was arrested at his apartment in Boston. He faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and wire fraud. Nathan Cole was arrested soon after, and his connections to multiple disappearances on the cruise line began unraveling in court. The case exposed not only Daniel's betrayal, but also the hidden dangers lurking aboard luxury cruise ships. Behind the glittering lights and elegant dinners, organized criminal operations had been using these floating resorts to prey on the vulnerable for years. Lauren's decision to disappear saved her life, and her reappearance shattered the illusion of safety aboard the glamorous world of cruise vacations. What began as a dream honeymoon ended with a global investigation and the brutal exposure of greed, corruption, and survival at any cost.